Welcome back to another Runic Strife Gauntlet video. This time we're covering Acts 2 through 5. Here's a reminder of the Gauntlet Zone modifiers for the first 5 acts, and if you want a bit more detail about these modifiers and their impact, I covered them in a bit more depth in the previous video in this series for surviving Act 1. You can check that out if you're interested, it's linked in the description below. Now, before getting into the acts, I want to stress once again that we do not have any information about how bosses are being modified in the Gauntlet. We only know that by Zizaran's description, campaign bosses may be joined by other bosses or have different abilities. Because of this, we can only prepare for what we know just by going by the original bosses and how they work. So, you've survived Act 1 and you're moving into Act 2. Be careful in the first zone before making it to the Act 2 town, the Southern Forest. It's easy to get completely overwhelmed by the density of monsters here, and the most dangerous monsters here are the Bramble Cobras. Their projectiles will be covering the screen in the Gauntlet because of the +2 projectiles mod, so be careful not to over-aggro in this zone. Now, as I mentioned in the previous video, you want to be cold resistance capped before fighting Mavail, but once you've made it into Act 2, you want to be progressing towards resistance capping all 3 elements. Make use of vendor recipes for resistance rings and your crafting bench to craft needed resistance. In various zones in Act 2, such as the Old Fields and in the Northern Forest, you'll encounter these ground slam bears. These monsters deal a lot of damage in the base game, and it's easy to get chain stunned to death very quickly if you get hit by one of them. They're very slow, so just try to move around them. In the Chamber of Sins, there are a lot of dangerous monsters. These are mostly skeletons. The archers can deal lightning damage, and there's also skeletons that use spark as well. The spark skeletons are especially dangerous when these necromancers are nearby because they use conductivity on you, lowering your lightning resistance. So be on the lookout for that once you're cursed. All of these skeletons are very weak though. Even in the Gauntlet they'll die very quickly. Over in the crypt, there are similar skeletons which deal different elemental damage depending on their type, so watch out for those. The Riverways has more of those Bramble Cobras, but the very dangerous monsters here are the Skeleton Spriggans. These spawn these little pineapple looking things on the ground which explode and deal a lot of damage. Make sure to keep moving here to avoid getting locked down. The Western Forest doesn't have that many dangerous monsters, just watch out for the Exploding Bandits. They have a purple colour tint and they just run towards you, so you can recognise them immediately when they get close to you. Make sure they don't actually get there and explode on top of you. I recommend helping Illyra for the +15% elemental resistances if you're struggling to cap resistances. Otherwise, consider helping Kratin for the +8% movement speed, which can help you get out of some sticky situations. Now, the Weaver is notoriously rippy in the Gauntlet, but this sub-boss is significantly less dangerous if you know what to do here. The dangerous part is this ranged projectile ability, which shotguns due to the extra projectiles, but the Weaver only uses this ability if you're at range from her. Try to stay in melee range and rotate around the boss to avoid most of the melee hits. Melee builds using Sunder will be able to easily blow this boss up with Intimidating Cry and the Sunder shockwaves from the ads. The Vaal Ruins is the most dangerous area in Act 2. Watch out for these archers in particular that use Explosive Arrow. There's also these ranged mobs which can really hurt if you have a bunch of them hitting you at once. In this zone, try to line of sight monsters as much as possible, making good use of the terrain and kill packs one by one. In the Northern Forest, look out for these Night Adders which use a stream of fire. This will hurt a lot in the Gauntlet. And in this zone, you'll also encounter Ritual Altars. Watch out for those monsters that spawn as part of the ritual, especially the Chaos DD explosions that they use. I can't recommend doing the rituals unless you're really struggling for gear, because it will be rippy, but be careful if you do. There are more ground slam bears in the caverns, avoid those, and later on in the caverns you'll encounter some ruins with, you've guessed it, more elemental projectile skeletons. There's more of the same all the way to the Act 2 boss, the Vaal Oversoul. This boss isn't particularly scary with the Gauntlet modifiers. Just be wary of the slam. Remember that 10% haste modifier is in play, so avoid trying to time it, just get out of the way. Avoid falling rocks as well, and when the boss uses the laser ability, just rotate around the boss to avoid those hits. Alright, you've made it to Act 3. Now, Acts 3, 4 and 5 generally have less monsters that are really dangerous because of the Gauntlet mods, but they still have some areas and bosses that are very scary, so don't let your guard down. Avoid doing this Blight encounter in the sewers. This can be tempting, but Blight monsters are not worth the risk. If you get unlucky, you can easily get shotgunned to death by these monsters. And once you reach the docks, you're going to want to overlevel in this zone. Reset it several times to farm experience and loot. But be aware that this isn't a safe zone. Still watch out for over-aggroing. These Void Bearer monsters are the most scary ones in this zone. They deal a lot of cold damage. Look out for the shield charging monsters in the Ebony Barracks. Try to predict their movement so that you're not ending up right on the end of their shield charge, as they deal a lot of physical damage. General Gravicius is very dangerous, especially his torch throw ability, which can easily shotgun you. Watch out for the falling fireballs too. Try to kite him around and stay on the move so you're never at risk of being hit by those torches. The Lunaris Temple level 2 is probably the most dangerous zone in Act 3. Take it slowly. There's packs of tentacle miscreations here that are scary. They shoot a load of projectiles which deal physical and fire damage. They'll aim at your position and they'll rotate to re-aim slightly as you move, but their tracking is quite slow, so you can move to avoid the stream of projectiles. You want to do this to move out of the way before attacking so that you avoid eating a bunch of damage while you're trying to kill them. Piety can be dangerous, but mostly watch out for her Cold Archer transform. Those projectiles really hurt, and obviously don't stand on top of her when she's in that form because she'll shotgun you. And during the Fire transform, just try to kite away from her so the melee attacks are avoided. Now, you are going to want to complete the library quest on many characters to access certain gems from Ciosa. Both the library and the archives can be a bit dangerous. Try to kill packs one at a time before moving on. Pick up any of the gems that you need which you couldn't get from previous vendors from Ciosa. Despite its nerf, Determination is great for its early physical hit mitigation. Alternatively, consider Flesh and Stone in Sandstance and Arctic Armor. Dominus is the big bad of Act 3. Two of the first 3 sub-bosses that he spawns are very dangerous, one which shoots fire projectiles and uses Leap Slam, and another that spawns Spark Totems. Keep your distance from these sub-bosses, especially the Leap Slammer, as you can easily get shotgunned by their fire projectiles in close range. The first phase of Dominus is the most dangerous because of his lightning projectiles. Don't try to tank these in the Gauntlet, use the terrain to block them and kite Dominus. If he blinks on you, reposition to make use of the terrain, and whatever you do, don't get hit by his Hand of God ability. That is almost certain death in the Gauntlet. Rotate around him in the second phase to avoid too many stacks of corrupting blood. You can always portal out to refill flasks. Act 4, much like Act 3, has a much lower amount of normal enemies found in zones which are really juiced up by the Gauntlet modifiers, but the really scary encounters in Act 4 are the bosses, and there are a lot of them. Now, once you're in Act 4, you'll want to be on the lookout for Amethyst Rings. These start dropping at monster level 38. Make sure that you're checking vendors when their inventory refreshes after leveling up. You're not in a big hurry to get these rings because you've got until the end of Act 5, but you want to be getting at least a few of these to be ready for when the Gauntlet modifiers change in the second half of the campaign. Now, before you enter the Grand Arena, I'd recommend rolling a bleed removal flask if you can. The statues in this zone inflict bleed with their attacks, and there's a lot more monsters in further zones which do the same. Once you've defeated Duresso and Calm, you'll be entering the belly of the beast. Together with the Harvest, these are the scariest zones in this act, mainly due to the awkward layout creating a lot of bottlenecks, but also because of the bosses in these locations. Watch out for the Gut, Spiker and Flayer monsters which inflict bleeding with their attacks. And be on the lookout for the Stygian Revenant. Their ranged projectiles deal a substantial amount of damage, and they use DD, which is much easier to see than it used to be, but still needs to be avoided at all costs. Piety is not much scarier in the Gauntlet than in the base game, but obviously everything deals a bit more damage. Avoid the beam and try to stay at range because her melee hits do a lot of damage. Now, once you've got past Piety, you're on to the 3 sub-bosses before Malachi. Each of these are very dangerous. Malagaro. Watch out for the purple traps that he drops on the ground. They deal fire and chaos damage. It's okay to tank a few of these, but you don't want to run over a bunch of them at once. He also occasionally uses Detonate Dead, so make sure to avoid that. Staying in melee range and rotating around him will prevent him using his Ethereal Knives ability. Doedre is notoriously rippy in the Gauntlet due to the extra projectiles. Take this fight slowly and only go for damage when you have enough time to get the ability off without being hit by her projectiles. The curses in the arena constantly rotate. You want to be in the one which has a green hue, which is enfeeble. This will make you deal a bit less damage, but it's significantly less risky than being in the temporal chains area, which makes you more likely to get hit because you're much slower. Cursing Doedre is a bad idea. She'll eat the curse and deal bonus damage for 5 seconds thereafter. Shavron is also very dangerous. If you move into melee range with her, she'll use lightning tendrils instead of lightning projectiles, which is an easier way to deal with this fight. Avoid the exploding books that are spawned around the arena. For Malachi, his overhead slam and teleport slam must be avoided as they deal huge amounts of damage, but one of the very dangerous abilities that he uses because of the Gauntlet modifiers is the projectile that he throws, as this shotguns with the extra projectiles. Try to keep him on screen so you can see his animations. And watch out for the AoE runes on the ground in Phase 2. These can be a bit scary when they stack up. Now once Malachi is down, you've made it to the final act in the first half of the campaign. But not before you make it through one of the rippiest zones in the entire campaign, that's the Ascent. This zone is really scary. Try to go slow, it's incredibly easy to get overwhelmed here and the monsters deal a lot of damage. In particular, the ranged goats that shoot cold projectiles are dangerous, and the flicker strike monsters. Try to kill packs one at a time to avoid over-aggroing. Now, as you progress Act 5, hopefully by this point you found some amethyst rings, but if not, keep checking vendor refreshes for that gear swap in Act 6. Once you've made it to the Chamber of Innocence, this is your new home for a while. Overlevel here whilst also trying to upgrade your gear in the process. I'd recommend overleveling until around level 50, but some may want to push even further. Now Innocence is a bit scary in the Gauntlet. His first phase, you want to avoid getting hit by the big sweeping melee attack. In the second phase, all of his dangerous abilities are well telegraphed, but be aware of the 10% haste if you're trying to time it. When he slides across the ground, he'll spawn a bunch of spark-like projectiles, so watch out being too close to him when he moves. Rotate around him during the beam, and get as much DPS in as possible during this phase. Avoid the two slam abilities, one with the big circle telegraph and the other one where he slides to a location and drops the slam there right after. If he uses the bullet hell ability, I'd recommend portaling out, and when you portal back in, be sure to wait in grace period for about 10 seconds to allow all of the projectiles from the bullet hell to disappear. Sometimes they go invisible, but they're still there, so just wait it out to be sure that they're gone. Alternatively, if you don't want to portal out, you can do the fight how it was intended. When Innocence uses the bullet hell, you can stand behind a statue and it will block all of the projectiles. This also works to block the beam. Watch out for these monsters in the Torched Courts, the Sanguine Sisters. They are extremely scary with the multi-proj mod. On the way to Kitava, on the Cathedral rooftop, watch out for the Kitava's Herald monsters which leap slam on top of you. They also use a ranged projectile ability that can shotgun you if you stand still, so keep moving. Now, Act 5 Kitava is actually one of the easier bosses in the Gauntlet campaign, but obviously we don't know if he'll have extra abilities or if a bonus boss will be in the arena, so we can only plan for what we know. As always, avoid the slams when he smashes his fist into the ground, and the red circle slam which converges towards you before exploding. The one ability that he uses that's very rippy in the Gauntlet is when he grabs some of the cathedral rubble and throws it at you. These are projectiles and they will shotgun you, but just be aware of where you were standing when he started using that ability and move away from that location. And with that, you've killed Kitava and you're progressing into the second half of the Gauntlet campaign. The zone modifiers are about to change in a big way, and we'll be covering all of that, including the final 5 acts and mapping in the next video, in this mini-series in a few days' time. Thanks for watching this video, and thank you for your ongoing support. As always, stay tuned and stay safe.